Hi everyone, my name is Agora and welcome back to my channel. Today I want to explore a question that's been tackled time and time again throughout history and literature. What happened to Odysseus? We all know the story by now, either because you've seen the Christopher Nolan movie, or because you've studied the story in school, or maybe because you've watched my previous YouTube video. The short version is that Odysseus, classical hero famed for his metis or his cunning, leaves his home of Ithaca to fight in the Trojan War, and after encountering a lot of women, monsters, and a lot of divine wrath, he finally returns home after a 20-year absence. Or does he? I'd argue the answer is a little bit more complicated than that. In this video, we'll be explaining the return of Odysseus and its aftermath, and why the notion of a journey home has fascinated us for the better part of 2,000 years. We already know that at the end of the Odyssey, although Odysseus has physically returned to Ithaca, he's not fully acting like himself. To rid himself of the suitors, he abandons the quality that he's best known for, his metis, which has helped him time and time again in times of difficulty, in exchange for violence. In a way, Odysseus, as he was before the war, never actually returns home. He's there physically, but mentally and emotionally, he's stuck somewhere between the shores of Troy and Ithaca. His travels, his wandering, all the death he has both seen and caused has fundamentally changed Odysseus, both as a man and as a ruler. That gap, the gap between Odysseus's physical return and his emotional/spiritual non-return, has fascinated artists and writers for centuries. Odysseus is described as being polytropon, having a multifaceted ingenuity. He is intelligent, but in a way where he's able to adapt his intelligence to be able to always come on top of whatever situation is presented in front of him. The symbolism of his journey, of his return home, is just as malleable, allowing varied interpretations and nuances to be attributed to it, often shaped by different socio and economic contexts. But let's start from the beginning. What does mythology tell us about the fate of Odysseus? The Odyssey itself signals to us that Odysseus was bound to leave again. When Odysseus goes to visit the seer Tiresias, the seer informs him that his death would come from the sea. Now, when you're reading this as part of the Odyssey, the detail remains relatively unnoticed, because the big piece of news here is that Odysseus will actually be able to return to Ithaca, which, as we've talked about previously, in a way, he does. What we know of Odysseus after the end of the Odyssey actually comes to us through the Telegony, which is the last of the epic poems of what is so-called the Trojan cycle. This Trojan cycle, which includes the Iliad and the Odyssey, tells the entire story of the Trojan War, including its origin, its conclusion, and the fate of all those associated with it. This is a non-Homeric poem of uncertain origin and author. We only have fragments of the work, so the main source of the story is a different body of work, the Chrestomathy of Proclus, which contains a summary of all the epic poems. The Telegony follows Odysseus after the suitors have been killed. He is not adjusting well to life in Ithaca, and before long he's back traveling, as part of which he gets married and fathers another son, before returning back home. Separately to him, we're back on the island of Aea, where the witch Circe, unbeknownst to Odysseus, is living in the company of their son Telegonus, who was conceived during that year that Odysseus and Circe had spent together. Prompted by Athena, Circe reveals to Telegonus who his father is, and allows for him to leave the island of Aea in search of Odysseus, who is completely unaware of his existence. Before departing, Circe gives her son a weapon with which to protect himself. This is a spear forged by the god Hephaestus, and whose tip has been dipped in the poison of a stingray. Telegonus sets off, but is actually caught in a storm, which washes him ashore of an island unknown to him. Like father, like son, Telegonus sees cattle that does not belong to him and decides to help himself. Reminiscent of the encounter between Odysseus and Polyphemus, the owner of the cattle returns home and catches Telegonus in his act and attacks him to defend his cattle. In the ensuing battle, Telegonus strikes the man with his spear. As the man is dying, Telegonus then realizes that the man in front of him is none other than his own father, Odysseus, whose death has indeed come from the sea. Stricken with grief and guilt for what he's done, Telegony brings Odysseus' body back to Aea with him, accompanied by Telemachus and Penelope. They bury Odysseus together with Circe, after which an absolute incestuous nightmare occurs. Penelope marries Telegonus, and Telemachus marries Circe.
Be my honor to be your new stepfather.
This concludes the Trojan cycle and officially ends the story of the Trojan War. Well, what does the Telegony tell us about Odysseus' return? In my view, it tells us that Odysseus never fully returned home. He has literally left pieces of himself in the form of children scattered throughout the Mediterranean. What is left is a man who is not who he was when he left Ithaca. His journey has fundamentally changed him to the point where he can't bear to remain in the home that he had longed for 20 years, and to remain with the wife and son that he had so desperately missed. His nostos, his desire to return home, has actually turned into a nostalgia for the journey itself and the escape that it's able to provide him. Odysseus' thirst for knowledge is often blinding, which can cause him to lead his companions astray. And that is precisely what lands him in Dante Alighieri's eighth circle of hell. We are in the year 1300, and the Italian poet Dante Alighieri is on a journey of his own which starts in a dark forest. By descending through the lowest levels of hell, he is hoping to find spiritual redemption and ultimately ascend into heaven. This is the context of the Divine Comedy. I will do a whole in-depth video on the Divine Comedy, but for now, all you need to know is that Dante, accompanied by his Latin poet Virgil, is traveling through the circles of hell and meeting the souls that are condemned to spend eternity there. Our protagonists are now in the eighth pit of the eighth circle. This is where the souls of fraudulent advisors, or people who during their life have used their intelligence to deceive their fellow man, are spending eternity wrapped in flames. As they make their way through the circle, Dante notices a flame which, unlike all the others, actually has two prongs. His Latin companion informs him that these flames contain the souls of Ulysses, which is the Latin name of Odysseus, and Diomedes, who are condemned to spend eternity together, just as in life they had deceived others together. In fact, Diomedes, another Greek warrior in the Trojan War, in life had contributed to 3 of Odysseus' tricks, including the Trojan horse, which ultimately led to the death of thousands. It's worth noting a couple of things here before we proceed. Number 1, Dante did not know Greek. Therefore, his interpretation of Odysseus' fate is going to diverge from the mythological portrayal that we discussed earlier. The second is that Dante is an Italian poet with a very strong Latin influence, which affects his perception of the Greek hero. According to Roman myth, Rome itself was founded by Trojan refugees, Aeneas in particular, who were escaping the shores of Troy after the end of the war. Therefore, in the Latin tradition, Odysseus is not painted in a particularly good light. And a big influence of this is actually Virgil himself, who is now accompanying Dante through hell. Therefore, to Dante, Odysseus is famous not only for his exceptional intelligence, but also for the very sinful ways in which he uses it. His intellect becomes an instrument of fraud, of pride, and of overreaching ambition. Prompted by Virgil, Odysseus' soul begins to narrate to Dante the events leading to his death. In a short monologue, Odysseus explains that after returning to Ithaca, he again set sail to attempt a feat which was against all reason and went against all the warning of the gods, and that is to cross the Pillars of Hercules, also known as the Straits of Gibraltar. Odysseus is moved by an unquenchable thirst for knowledge, by wanting to know at all costs what lies beyond this limit. His companions, though, are afraid. They know that no man is meant to cross the pillars. So Odysseus convinces them with a very moving speech, which says, "Considerate la vostra semenza. Fatti non foste a viver come bruti, ma per seguir virtute e conoscenza." Or in English, this can also be translated as, "Consider well the seed that brought you forth. You were not made to live as brutes, but to pursue virtue and knowledge." Inspired by this, the man then agreed to proceed on the journey. Once the ship has sailed past the strait, the men see a very large mountain purgatory, which is not meant for human eyes. Therefore, as a divine punishment, they are swallowed by the sea and thus meet their end. Odysseus, driven by sinful, limitless curiosity, leads his companions to their death, exhorting them with powerful words, ignoring the danger that he was putting them in. The ironic element to this is that although Odysseus is located in one of the lower circles of hell, which should represent heinous crimes that are met with equally terrible punishments, he is not described with contempt or judgment. Dante, although acknowledging that Odysseus did something that was wrong and therefore must be punished for it, is still fascinated by him and lets his story rest with the reader rather than providing additional moral commentary of his own. I think this is because Odysseus' thirst for knowledge is profoundly human in a way. Although we value our homes and cherish our origins, throughout history, humans have been fascinating with understanding the world around us, crossing the limits of knowledge, sometimes driven, yes, by glory and arrogance, but also to feel like we're part of something bigger. That maybe if we can understand the universe and the world around us, we can also understand our own place and meaning in the universe. Many centuries later, in one of the darkest chapters of history, Primo Levi, an Italian Jewish writer in a Nazi concentration camp, would recall this exact canto from the Divine Comedy and would cling to Odysseus' journey as a reminder of what it means to be human, at a time where all efforts were being made to dehumanize him. In a moving example of how literature can act as a form of resistance, within his memoir, If This Is a Man, Levi recounts how during his time in Auschwitz, when he had been stripped of everything, his home, his possession, his appearance, and his name, he struggled to recall the speech from Dante's Inferno that Odysseus makes to his companions, encouraging them to fulfill their humanity, pursuing knowledge and virtue. This verse, the same exact verse that lands Odysseus in hell, according to Dante, acts as a lifeline to Levi. Odysseus' journey, during which he's searching from the unknown and for himself, acts as a reminder of what it means to be human, and hence his persistence in trying to recall it. In Levi's eyes, Odysseus' journey made him human in his entirety, able to make his own decisions, able to push boundaries, even if that ultimately led to death. In a situation of physical and psychological torture, Levi could think of no better fate than that to feel human. But what if you never knew your home, the place that was supposed to give you your name, your traditions, your view of the world, your identity? Can a journey help you to know yourself? That is the question that acts as the engine driving the journey that Achille, a fisherman from Santa Lucia in the Caribbean, goes on. In Book 3 of Omeros by Derek Walcott, Achille, a descendant of enslaved persons, is caught by a sunstroke and embarks on a journey through space and time, which allows him to go back to Africa, back to his father. When he arrives, though, he realizes that he doesn't belong there. In fact, he's not even sure if he really exists. In the Yoruba tradition that Walcott draws on, our parents are meant to give us the names that reflect hopes and dreams they have for us. So if the name has no meaning, does that mean that the person has no meaning either? Although Achille is allowed to journey home spiritually, although his nostos is completed spiritually, this is only an illusion. His identity has been disrupted and shaped by colonial history, and therefore he cannot return to a home he has never known. Unlike in the case of Primo Levi's work, unlike Odysseus himself, Achille has never known his home. He has no concrete home to which he can hope to return to. All he has left is a sense of non-belonging, a hole in his heart that no amount of traveling can possibly fill. Therefore, although the figure of Odysseus does not directly appear here, the parallel of Odysseus' journey acts as a cruel reminder that not all the people who search for home, not all the people who are searching for their own identity are able to find it. With all that in mind then, how do we answer our original question? What does happen to Odysseus? What is his ultimate fate? In a way, I think that his fate is to continue wandering, to continue to embark on journeys that attempt to give us a sense of meaning, of purpose, and maybe even belonging. Just like his metis, his intelligence, his journey takes on different forms, and the return home isn't always a successful one. But no matter what, no matter the spears, the shipwrecks, the imprisonment, the displacement, Odysseus will never fade. He lives in all of us with all the mistakes and imperfections. He compels us to keep pushing, to keep exploring in the hopes of arriving at a place where we can maybe meet and finally know ourselves. Thanks for watching.